So let's talk about monsters and how they attack in 4 Against the Darkness. Before we get started in learning how to set up our dungeons, navigate said dungeons, and find ourselves a final boss to great reward, we need to understand some basic rules on how combat works in 4 Against Darkness, and a handful of other possibilities, from retreating to quests to magical challenges to leaving the dungeon once the adventure is done, or sometimes in mid-adventure. You can refer to page 20 in the 4 Against Darkness starter book on how to attack monsters. Now, just like each of your characters, every monster or enemy you'll come across in your dungeon has a level. Obviously, that level will give you some idea of how dangerous that monster is going to be should you choose to attack. But don't be fooled either. Just because an enemy has a low level does not mean that they can't be formidable, especially if you happen to roll high on how many your party is going up against. But listen, we'll get to that shortly. Just a note. To wound an enemy, you must roll at least their level. To successfully defend against an enemy, you must roll over their level. Some house rules negate these and modify them to either make the game more challenging or less challenging. But the base rule is to wound, you need to roll their level. To defend, you need to roll over their level. So an attack on any monster or enemy, or defense for that matter, is determined by a roll of a d6. As discussed in the previous video on character creation, some classes will get to add their levels or a part of their level to their attack or defense rolls. An example of this is the cleric that we created in the previous video. A cleric gets to add half of their level rounded down to all attacks, but they get to add their entire level to any attacks against undead creatures. Also, certain weapons and armor might additionally modify the bonus on these attacks. A note, though this is true, some weapons and armors have the opposite effect and decrease the amount of attack or defense. As we discussed again in the previous video, any light weapons have a -1 to attacks. Keep in mind as well that some of these modifiers only work against certain kind of monsters. As an example, crushing weapons have a greater effect against enemies like skeletons, whereas a ranged weapon like a bow and arrow has no effect against skeletons. So keep that in mind as well. So there are 2 kinds of monsters in 4 Against Darkness: minions and bosses. Minions are divided into 2 categories: vermin and minions. Vermin are typically weaker, though they can show up in greater numbers, whereas minions are a little bit tougher. The big difference, though, between these two is that a vermin encounter does not award you any XP points, whereas minions do. So every 10 minion encounters that are not vermin award you a single XP point, and when you reach 10 of these in your adventure, your party earns the right to use an XP roll to attempt to level up a single character. So minions have a single life each. Successful attacks greater than an enemy's level allow you to slay more than 1 monster. For example, if you roll a total of 8 against a group of level 3 minions, you kill 2 minions. The first 3 points in the attack kill 1 level 3 minion, and the second 3 points kill another level 3 minion, while the remaining 2 points of that roll are wasted since they are not enough to kill a third minion. This is different between bosses who have multiple life points. So if you came across a boss that has 6 life points at level 3 and you rolled a 6, you would actually take away 2 of those life points. You would wound them twice. Now keep in mind, when a group of minions loses half of their original number, they are forced to make a morale roll. This roll might force the remaining minions to run away. Roll a d6. On a 1 to 3, the minions flee. On a 4 to 6, they fight to the death. This applies unless the specific monster has a caveat that says differently in their descriptions. The second kind of monster are bosses. These include anything from both the Weird Monster table and the boss table. All of these are quite tougher than minions, though they show up in lesser amounts typically. In addition, they have multiple attacks, sometimes special abilities. Now, when a boss loses more than half its life, that boss level drops by 1 and is forced to make a morale roll. Again, unless it is otherwise specified in the boss's or monster's description. If an attack roll exceeds that of the boss's level, there is a chance you might inflict more than 1 wound. As I mentioned before, if you have a level 3 boss and you roll a 6, that is a successful hit, and that would do 2 wounds because a 6 is double that boss's level. If you are forced to make a morale roll, remember that when a monster flees, you don't give chase, but you do, however, get rewarded with all of their treasure. It's also good to note that sometimes when you test a morale roll, that monster will fight to the death. So finally, let's talk about reactions. Most of the time, unless otherwise stated, your party will get to act before any of the monsters. One consistent exception to this rule, however, is when encountering wandering monsters, they will always get to act first. So your choices when coming into a room or a corridor are 2 things. The first, attack right away. Get right into the combat. Second is let the monsters act first and see what they do. In this case, you're going to roll a d6 and refer to the reactions table at the bottom of each of the monster's stat block. Now, the reactions can vary. Everything from they offer you food and rest. You find that the monsters are peaceful. Sometimes the monsters will flee, especially if they are outnumbered. Sometimes you can bribe the monsters. They might offer you a puzzle, a quest, a magic challenge. And then oftentimes they will just fight, including fighting to the death. Again, your choice as players to decide whether you're going to act first or let the monsters act first and see what happens. Oftentimes, rolling the reaction table does add a bit of spice to your encounters as it creates whole new scenarios. And also, when you roll a reactions table and something peacefully happens, you get to move into the next room. However, those monsters will remain in that room. So when you backtrack through your dungeon, you will then come against them and get to face them again. Again, given the choice to either attack right away or roll reactions. Well, that's about it when it comes to combat. It's as easy as that. The adventures are pretty specific in most cases about anything that contradicts what we've already gone over. But those caveats are few and far between. One of those caveats is in some adventures, the wandering monsters don't get to act first. However, we're in the starter book. Wandering monsters will always attack first. In our next video about 4 Against Darkness, we'll be discussing how to start your dungeon, along with how to track monsters, rooms, treasure, etc. All you really need is the starter book, a pencil, some graph paper, and a handful of 6-sided dice. So, that being said, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video about how to start your first dungeon.